Sounds like Europe. Cross-border podcasting.
Hello and welcome to Sounds Like Europe, Cross-Border Podcasting, a project brought to you by Wipod. I am your host, Javi Caminero. It's been a while since I last talked to someone to learn about podcasts in their country, right? Since I started this podcast, I've been trying to keep up to date with the main trends and the biggest hits in podcasting in different parts of Europe. I'm interested in knowing what works in other countries and why, so I can also try to anticipate if any of these trends will find their way into my work and how to apply them. So I want to discover countries through their podcasts, through what their people listen to. That's why today we are going to look at Poland. What do they listen to in Poland, and what have the last few years been like for the Polish podcast industry? To find out, I'm going to talk to Michal Matus, a Polish journalist and podcaster. Hello, Michal, how are you?
Hi, fine. I'm fine, thank you.
First of all, tell me, what's your story and what's your relationship with podcasts?
Well, I started podcasting a few years ago. I have a radio background, so that started all these audio story, let's call it like this, in the radio. And after a few years of being a host in a morning show, I decided to stop doing it because, I feel I couldn't get that deep into the topics that I was really interested in. Because the radio format makes you to do really short forms, and I wanted to do something much longer, much deeper. So I decided to change my job, to start podcasting, and so I did. I created podcast series that were more reportage-like than just conversational. My main focus are podcasts that are really rich in sound, and that's what I really like.
And when you decided to change radio for podcasting, were podcasts already popular in Poland, or were you kind of going into the darkness and alone?
Well, the podcasting just started to peak in Poland then, a few years ago. It was really the moment when podcasts were still some kind of niche, but they were growing really fast. Now it's definitely more stable ground and more common for a lot of people. But then it was just the beginning of the big growth in Poland.
Yes, to be able to locate properly the dates. When was this more or less? Around what year did you decide to go into podcasting?
I started podcasting in 2021, and the really huge growth in Poland in podcasting industry started like in 2020, and now it's slowing down a bit because the market is really saturated with podcasts in Poland right now. It's a very popular form.
Yeah, but it seems that it has been a few very intense years. And what do you expect of the future of podcasting in Poland? Do you think it can peak again in a few years? How do you see it going?
Now podcasting in Poland is very popular, and the main media brands are all in podcasts. There are some researches that the monthly reach is around 10 million. So in a month, 10 million of Poles are listening to the podcast. So this is really a big number. And I think it can grow, but I think it may stop in something like 15 million. Because, to be honest, there are 14 million people in Poland, almost 35 more precise. So the 10 million is really huge number, and I think it's there's not much space for growth anymore.
When you have today a look at the charts in Poland, you can find true crime, conversational podcasts, maybe some documentaries. But what are the most listened to genres in Poland?
Well, if it comes to the topic the podcasts are about. I think the most popular are the news, then some kind of conversation with celebrities, then health and crime stories. But the most popular ones that people admit to listen to are the ones about news and this kind of stuff.
How would you describe the average Polish podcast listener? I mean, are they mostly male or female, or are they adult people or maybe teenagers?
This is very interesting because, to be honest, there is no group that's really standing out from the whole society. If you look at the gender issue, there's equilibrium, to be honest, almost exact. When you look at the age of the listeners, it's of course the most popular podcasts are most popular in the group of people who are 25 to 35, but this whole chart is pretty flat. So there are also a lot of people, more than 50%, who are over 55, and a lot of people, more than 50%, in the age of 18 plus, who are listening to podcasts. In the 25 to 35, it's about 70%. So this is not that big difference. So you can say that almost all Poles are listening to podcasts equally.
Mm-hmm. If you had to pick one Polish podcast that you consider paved the way for the rest, which one would it be? I mean, in thinking about podcasts that were there before that peak you mentioned in 2020.
There was one podcast that I think really important in terms of audience growth in Poland, and this is a podcast called State of the World Report. This is connected to political issues in Poland because in 2016 there were a shift of power in Poland. And the new party who started to rule really got into public media. And they started to change many things in public media faster than it happened before in different cases in different governments in Poland. And it ended in a big crisis in a very popular among intellectuals and people above 45 years of age radio station. And this station fell apart because of protests of the journalists, because of the policy of the state. But it made a huge group of listeners who were used to this certain type of audio content without the content, because there were no radio station like the one that fell apart. And the first journalists from the station who created his podcast, it was the guy called Dariusz Rosiak, and he created the State of the World Report. It was just copy-paste his audition from the radio, but it grew so much, so fast, and he gathered so big amounts of money through crowdfunding platforms that it grew to whole new redactions, whole new, well, let's call it small internet radio stations. Then another podcast popped out from this journalistic group who left the radio. This was the Radio 3 from the Polish radio broadcaster. And this was the event that made people who are 45 plus, 55 plus to really get into podcasts, into internet listening. They started doing it, and it opened the gate for other podcast producers, creators to be able to reach the audience that were once connected only to radio station.
And what improvements do you feel are needed in podcasting in Poland right now for the industry to be truly successful in a few years?
If you look at the business stuff, the business side of podcasting, it is successful enough already. But I think that what podcasting needs in Poland is to be more aware of ethics and disinformation, misinformation. This kind of stuff is spreading really fast around different podcast producers, and I think that podcasting industry is much more infected with misinformation because there are not so many, let's call them old-fashioned journalists that have their ethics and have their background in finding misinformation. So there are a lot of people who are misinforming. There are some problems with plagiarism also because, for example, people who are making true crime podcasts, they are almost copying books and telling the books like some people were, quoting like 90% of the book without saying anything about this book. So there were some problems. There are still some problems, and I think this is the place where Polish podcasting industry can and should grow.
And to finish with the interview, Michal, I would like to ask you 3 questions about the podcasting industry in Poland. We've been talking all the episode about Poland, but I would like for you to give some recommendations. So if you were to say the most important podcast in Poland right now, which one would you choose?
Well, it's a difficult question because you can look from different perspectives on the importance of the podcast. But I think there's one podcast that is growing kind of fast, I would say, and is something more than just the podcast. And it's a podcast called Dwie lewe ręce. In Polish, it's 2 left hands in English. And it's a podcast about, well, let's say the most important things for society, news events and stuff like this, analysis, and from the leftist perspective. The journalists who are working there are, well, let's call them closer to the left than to the right. And what happens, what I can see, is that there is some audience growing around this podcast, and probably it will become something like bigger media group, because that's what their goals are, and it's really happening. So I think that in next 2 or 3 years there will be a big leftist podcasting and an information news media group that will grow from this podcast.
Maybe this kind of podcast, not only in Poland but in Europe as a whole, is what we need to face this misinformation that, as you mentioned before, is getting its time bigger and bigger and more popular.
Well, the guys that are working there, they are hardcore, old-fashioned journalists in terms of ethics and stuff. So I think that they will keep the level of misinformation really low.
Yeah. And when's your favorite moment to listen to podcasts?
Well, it depends on the type, because if I want to get just some information from podcasts or listen to just simple story told by one person, the best time for me, it's while I'm doing some house chores or driving a car. But when I want to just dive deep into the world of sound in some rich in audio podcast, that's more reportage than just talking, I like to listen to it in headphones in my bed.
And to finish with the interview, Michal, what's something that makes you stop everything and listen to a new podcast?
To be honest, I can't recall such situation. I can recall stopping everything to record a podcast, but not to listen. But also always good story with well-written cliffhangers does its job very well every single time.
Yeah. Michal Matus, a Polish journalist and podcaster, thanks a lot for being here on this episode of Sounds Like Europe.
Thank you a lot.
And to everyone listening to the interview, I've been your host, Javi Caminero. Thank you for doing so, and I hope you come back in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Sounds Like Europe, Cross-Border Podcasting is a WePod podcast funded by the Creative Europe programme. Hosted and written by Javi Caminero, sound design by Manu Tomillo, coordinator Alexander Damiano Ricci, executive producer Anna Ribera. Thank you.